Welcome back for part 3. Let's get right back into it as Musk begins to explain the home and transfer windows for his captive audience at the 2025 version of Starship Update. Actually, before we do that, let's remind people that the last Starship update that Musk did in this format for the public, where he allowed questions to be asked, was way back in 2022, and even that was invite only. Wonder why that would be. Anyway, home and transfer orbits.
So in terms of when can you go to Mars? So you can go to Mars every 2 years or every 26 months. So the next Mars opportunity is at the end of next year in about 18 months. So November, December is the next Mars opportunity. So we'll try to make that opportunity if we get lucky. I think we'll probably have a 50-50 chance right now because we've got to figure out orbital refilling in order to have enough capability to go to Mars. But if we achieve orbital refilling in time, then we will launch the first uncrewed Starship to Mars at the end of next year.
The home and transfer windows are indeed a limiting factor, and for Musk, they just continue to slip away into the future. Again, remember his presentation to IAC 2017, promising cargo craft on Mars by 2022 and human crews by 2024.
That's not a typo. Fairly confident that we can complete the ship and be ready for a launch in about 5 years. The Earth-Mars synchronization happens roughly every 2 years. So every 2 years, there's an opportunity for to fly to Mars. So then in 2024, we want to try to fly 4 ships, 2 of which would be crewed, and 2 of which two cargo and two crew.
Musk is no closer to Mars today than he was 9 years ago, when he wowed his followers with that presentation. And he has to date failed to produce any pertinent details about any aspect of colonization. For the transfer windows, we've used this cosmic train schedule before from Clouder.net that outlines the peak of each transfer window. The next one is in late fall 2026, and then the years slip from even to odd, occurring now in 2029, 2031, and 2033, with the ships landing about 9 months after they take off. So while Musk keeps promising next year, next transfer window, etc., given the hurdles that Starship has not cleared, you can rest assured that 2026 is going to come and go with no Starship launches heading out to the 4th planet from the Sun. This was absolutely without question prior to the incident at Massey's, and would be considered doubly so now that they've lost another ship and laid waste to their only test platform. And why is Musk explaining home and transfer windows yet again to employees that work at Boca Chica?
So this gives you an illustration of how does a spaceship go from Earth to Mars. So you got blue Earth there and red Mars. And I mean, the actual distance traveled on the arc is 1,000 times further than the moon. So you can't just go straight to Mars. You have to create this elliptical orbit with Earth at one point and Mars at the other side, at the far end of the ellipse, and then time where you are in that ellipse to intersect with Mars. So this is the orbital transfer, how you do orbital transfer from Earth to Mars. And if you look on your Starlink Wi-Fi router, you'll see this image, because the Starlink internet is what's being used to pay for humanity getting to Mars. So I'd just like to thank everyone out there who's bought Starlink, because you're helping secure the future of civilization and helping make life multiplanetary and helping make humanity a space-faring civilization. Thank you.
This group of rocket factory employees must be so grateful for yet another explanation of the trajectory path to get to Mars. But what Musk says at the back end about Starlink paying for the colonization of Mars is hilarious. And it's not even because Starlink is a tremendously problematic business model that needs to replace every orbital asset every 5 years and has a quarter the number of subscribers that Musk promised investors would sign up in the first year. While we're on that topic, if Starlink is paying anything at all to install Musk as the first imperator of Mars, by virtue of these Starlink terms and conditions, never mind funding that goal in its entirety, what returns on their investment are these Starlink investors to date expecting to receive? Or are investments in Musk companies now just no longer expected to produce returns to the investor? Which makes you wonder, what exactly is the state of their finances? Very fortunately, just a couple days ago, one of our Twitter followers sent this 4-page financial summary regarding Starlink Satellite Services Corp., a wholly owned subsidiary of SpaceX, issued and signed by Lauren Dreyer, who signed the document as president of Starlink, with Richard Lee as secretary. Unfamiliar with those names, we went looking for Ms. Dreyer and Mr. Lee on social media, and quickly found Lauren Dreyer's Twitter account, where she does not claim to be president of Starlink, but rather VP of Starlink Business Operations, and a SpaceX employee since 2006, and a director at X, which all seems more than a little incestuous. And as for Mr. Lee, he appears to be the same type of ghost as Jared Birchall, with no active social media accounts to speak of, and only a bare-bones LinkedIn. But even that says he is a senior director of tax and treasury at SpaceX, not at Starlink itself. So one of the questions we have about Lauren Dreyer is, does her signature on the form as company president have any legal ramifications as a false claim, given that this appears to be a formal business document? But the reason we brought this document in here is that there is a disclosure of net income at the bottom of page 1 carrying over to page 2, and we'll read it verbatim. The company generated net income of $72.7 million in 2024 and incurred a net loss of $30.7 million in 2023, primarily as a result of the fluctuations in the cost of Starlink kits being higher or lower than the price at which the company sold the Starlink kits in certain markets, and expenses incurred in certain markets prior to the sale of the Starlink kits. It's worth noting right now the company is trying to give those kits away for free in certain markets, including Canada. The company had retained earnings of $24.2 million at December 31st, 2024, and a stockholders' deficit of $48.5 million at December 31st, 2023. So 2/3 of the net income went to cover the previous shareholders' deficit. Musk is telling his audience here, and Starlink users in general, that they are financing the future colonization of Mars. Meanwhile, Starlink only managed to bank $24.2 million on the 4.6 million subscribers it claimed to have signed on at the end of 2024. So less than $6 profit per user per year, 50 cents per month, chump change. Without covering the previous deficit, that would still have only been $1.50 per head. That's not going to be building very many glass dome cities at any point in the near future, on Earth or on Mars.
So this is a tentative game plan that we're hoping to achieve, where we increase the cadence of flights to Mars dramatically with every launch window. So every roughly 2 years, we are dramatically increasing the number of ships that go to Mars, and ultimately try to get to 1,000 or 2,000 ships per Mars rendezvous.
The best part about this segment is we have been given numbers to work with, so let's start at the left and move across from 2026 to 2033. Although Musk just gave a slight possibility of making the 2026 window, he has assigned not 1, but 5 landers to make the journey in 2026, so launching within the next 16 months, roughly 480 days. Again, there's no chance of this happening, but let's pretend there is. 5 ships making the journey is what he presented, but it's not 5 launches. That would be over 100 launches, given that each mission craft is going to require in the neighborhood of 20 to 28 launches to refill the tanks. At 100-ton payload capability per flight for a ship that has to date delivered mere grams worth of payload to the bottom of the Indian Ocean. Moving to a spreadsheet to break the numbers down, if Musk were to start assembling the convoy of 5 ships in orbit today at 20 tankers per ship, that's 105 launches in roughly 480 days, so 1 every 4.5 days, call it 2 per week. And that cadence would only increase for every month that goes by without any launches to orbit. Just as an aside, this launch schedule already far exceeds the permissions that SpaceX has from the FAA and the state of Texas in Boca Chica, where they are restricted currently to 25 launches per year. But let's go to the 2028-29 window, where everything increases fourfold to 20 landers, requiring 400 tankers, launched inside a window of 26 months, 780 days, for a minimum launch cadence of 1 ship every 1.85 days, call it 4 per week, every week for 26 months. The 2031 window looks for another 5-fold increase in the number of landers and tankers to 100 and 2,000 respectively, launched inside a window of 26 months for a minimum launch cadence of 2.7 ships every day, call it 19 per week, every week for 26 months. In the 2033 window, 500 landers, 10,000 tankers, a minimum launch cadence of 13 ships per day, call it 95 ships per week, every week for 26 months straight. Also, those 2033 launches at 5,000 tons of propellant per launch would expend 52.5 million tons worth of propellant pollution into the atmosphere if they're still working with the current design of Starship. But since the 2033 launches are slated to carry 300 tons, we can only assume the vehicles are expected to continue to grow in size and therefore require greater volumes of propellant, increasing their carbon footprint accordingly. To help visualize the number of 52,500,000 tons of propellant, keeping in mind the total is split between the LNG and liquid oxygen, let's compare it to another vessel that transports LNG. This is the Energy Progress sailing out of Japan. The domes on here can hold a combined maximum of 145,344 cubic meters of liquefied natural gas. The conversion rate of cubic meter to tons per meter is 0.405, meaning it hauls 58,785 tons of LNG. And at 52.5 million tons worth of propellant required, that works out to 894 of these tankers. Over the course of 2 years, roughly one full tanker per day going up in smoke as the Starship and Super Heavy launch roughly every 2 hours. This entire area would be forced into becoming a permanent no-fly zone with accompanying sea lane closures, which has to be unprecedented, and would probably kill the entire cruise line industry operating in the Gulf of Mexico, along with every port operation along the shoreline, including Port Isabel and Brownsville. Also, and most people don't know this, everything from methane to potable freshwater for the deluge system has to be trucked into Boca Chica for these launches. Hundreds upon hundreds of tankers per launch for liquid methane, liquid oxygen, liquid nitrogen, helium for pressurization, and the deluge water, which cannot be salt water. So this launch cadence is all fantasy and nonsense anyway, but let's keep going since the goals under each window are the closest thing we've seen to a roadmap so far. The 5 landers listed under 2026 with a minimum payload of 10 tons are unmanned pathfinders to prove the ship can get to Mars and land safely. The 2029 landers, 20 of them carrying a total of 1,500 tons worth of gear, meant to land initial infrastructure, prep landing areas, and deliver equipment for people. No mention here of who or what would be prepping those landing areas or how. The 2031 window, 15,000 tons delivered by the fleet of 100 landers, and Musk is under the impression this will be enough to mine resources, generate propellant, and build habitats on the surface. What is not stated here is that, obviously, this would have to be a manned mission, and that will cut deep into the amount of payload being delivered to the surface for infrastructure and mining purposes. For each person per year, they're going to need about 1 ton of food, and they should have a minimum of 1 ton of water if the facility has proper top-end reclamation technology in place. And the 2033 fleet of 500 ships carrying a fantastical 150,000 tons worth of unspecified people and gear to the surface aims to increase independence from Earth, mine and then process Mars resources while creating global mobility and communications. We'll leave these numbers here just now because later they're going to demonstrate the absolute absence of critical thinking undertaken by Musk and whichever SpaceX cadet intern put this presentation together.
I mean, as a rough order of magnitude, this is just guesses, obviously, but we need to get about 1 million tons, is my guess, to the surface of Mars to make a civilization on Mars self-sustaining. And get to that critical point where if the resupply ships from Earth stop coming for any reason, Mars still succeeds. Mars can still grow. And so you can't be missing anything. You can't be missing even like the equivalent of vitamin C or anything. You've got to have everything you need for Mars to grow. That's essential. So my guess is that's about 1 million tons, but it might be 10 million tons. I hope it's not 100 million tons. That'd be a lot. But we want to try to get to that point and secure the future of civilization as quickly as possible.
More Musk guesswork on a topic that he has been guessing at for at least 10 years, because this goes back to the beginning. Here he is at IAC 2016, giving pretty much the exact same speech on the topic.
But yeah, these vehicles have very different purposes. This is really intended to carry huge numbers of people, ultimately millions of tons of cargo to Mars. So you really need something quite large in order to do that.
Today, he still guesses that they need to send about 1 million tons of cargo to Mars to make Mars self-sustaining. He doesn't say what cargo, never mind what systems or supplies would be brought, or what habitats they're intended to live in. Just 1 million tons. Well, maybe 10 million tons. Hopefully, not 100 million tons. That's how clueless Musk is.
So we're looking at different locations. The lead candidate right now is the Arcadia region. Now Mars has a lot of real estate, but when you combine all of the factors and say, okay, we can't be too close to the poles, we need to be near ice to get water, can't be too mountainous for the rockets, It narrows down to a smaller region. It's one of my daughter's name is Arcadia, actually. So we got the first Starships on Mars, gather critical data. The first flights there we'll send with the Optimus robot, so we can go out there and explore and kind of prepare the way for humans. That'll be a very cool image if we're able to achieve it by launching end of next year. It would actually technically arrive in 2027. That would be an epic picture to see Optimus walking around on the surface of Mars.
So these sites Musk says they're looking at are nothing more than the sites already located by NASA as suitable locations for a human landing. Nothing groundbreaking or proprietary here. Most of the other NASA rover sites sit within a reasonable 20 degrees distance from the equator without straying too close to the poles. Phoenix, landed in 2008, was a rover specifically for the Martian Arctic and therefore had to be the northernmost landing site. Arcadia Planitia has not had a rover yet, but then again, it is an unremarkable area devoid of geological formations. If Mars did have an ocean long ago, Arcadia Planitia would have been part of the ancient sea floor, making it fairly flat and smooth. So Musk is pretty much looking at landing in the Martian equivalent of Saskatchewan, in the middle of the Canadian prairies. Also an ancient seabed, and almost flat enough to see the back of your own head off in the distance. Looking at this frame before getting back into the presentation, can we just ask, which idiot on the CGI render team dropped the ball and used the Pez dispenser model for Starship here?
Launching 2 years later, we'd be sending humans. Assuming the first missions are successfully, we'd send humans on the next mission, and we'd really start building the infrastructure for Mars. Just to be safe, we might just do 2 landing episodes with Optimus, and do the third one with humans, we'll see. So, that classic picture of the workers on the Empire State.
So here he's saying that humans will come on the second convoy if all goes well on the first landings, meaning that straight away in 2029 they're going to have all the challenges of keeping humans alive in a desolate, desiccated, poisonous, vacuum-sealed radioactive freezer with nothing of note on the surface waiting for them. It would almost be hilarious if Musk wasn't presenting this as a serious consideration.
Are you serious?
Let's show how ridiculous Musk's presentation was using this image. The bot construction workers in a bastardized version of that famous construction crew photo from the 1930s. You know how they say a picture is worth 1,000 words? Well, here's one that raises 1,000 questions. Ignore the robots for now, and look a little deeper. What are we actually looking at? The bots appear to be suspended 100 stories or more in the air compared to the 52-meter, 171-foot known height of the Starship in the background. A building this high would be a massive undertaking for any crew on Earth, even with all the local and available resources. They are sitting on a metal girder, presumably steel. Where did that beam come from? Did it come from Earth? And how heavy would that beam have been? If it's a robust 18-inch by 18-inch girder, you're easily looking at 100 pounds per foot. So that beam alone would weigh well over a ton, and it's not fitting inside the Starship given the cargo door configuration. So are we now pretending that Mars will have a foundry, when steel foundries typically operate by burning fossil fuels to hit the 1600 degree temperature required? And you cannot turn iron ore into steel without carbon, and you cannot strengthen that alloy without a combination of chrome, nickel, molybdenum, and or vanadium. Regardless of where they're pretending it came from, how would it have gotten to the top of a 100-story high-rise? Well, there's only one way, and that's by construction cable crane. So where did the crane come from? Well, Earth, obviously, but how would they stuff that massive machine into a Starship cargo bay, when every piece would have to fit through the cargo door and ride down the platform to the ground? In the background now, there are 3 very small solar panel fields next to some partially buried tunnels that lead to 3 glass domes, which appear to be made from a single piece of material. Of course, such a dome doesn't even exist on Earth, where we have the silica and established glassworks required to even contemplate making something like that. These are obviously not coming by Starship in this fantasy, so now we're pretending they have giant glassworks on Mars. Right next to the vertical pillar of the skyrise, we see a cargo ship set down less than a vehicle length away from one of the glass domes, which would be disastrous for anybody in that dome should the Starship take off. In the background now, possibly several miles away, a different Starship has just taken off, so one has to wonder, how did people get to that craft, considering there are no ground vehicles of note, no access roads, and no propellant refilling facility visible anywhere? That's without even touching on the fact that a fragile battery-operated bipedal bot with dozens of articulated joints where the poisonous, corrosive, razor-sharp magnetic Martian dust could accumulate is quite possibly the worst choice for machinery to operate on the surface of this freezing planet. But now that we've seen Optimus on the surface of Mars, let's take the quickest, simplest way to kill this concept in the crib: power. While the company does not identify what cells are being used, though lithium-ion batteries would be a safe guess given the company's history for that type of cell, we do know that the bot has a 2.3 kilowatt-hour battery housed in its torso. Another stat that would have been useful here is the duty cycle of the bot with that power reserve. One of the few places where an estimated duty cycle was located was on a website called the Be Life Movement, which gave it an 8 to 9 hour operating time based on a 100 watt idle and 500 watt walking power draw estimate. So if the unit is active and walking, it uses 500 watts of power. No mention of the draw when it's carrying a full capacity 20 kilograms or 45 pounds, but the 500 watts does give us something to work with. The biggest problem where Optimus on Mars or the Moon is concerned is the fact that batteries hate extreme heat and cold. They don't react particularly well to radiation or micrometeorites either, but the temperature condition is a known showstopper, one that NASA figured out how to work around. Using the Perseverance rover as an example, the most recent addition to the fleet of rovers on Mars that landed on February 18th of 2021. In order to power that unit and keep it warm enough to function, including keeping a pair of peak demand batteries warm, NASA developed the Multi-Mission Radioisotope Thermoelectric Generator, the MMRTG, which is, in essence, a nuclear battery. It takes the heat put off by plutonium-238 and converts it into a steady form of electricity not requiring storage, pumping out 110 watts, with an expected lifespan of 14 years. 110 watts constantly means that the pack generates 2.64 kilowatt hours of energy per day, roughly the same amount as the battery pack in Optimus, except the MMRTG is 64 centimeters in diameter and 66 centimeters long, weighing about 45 kilograms. 24 inches by 25 and 94 pounds is the conversion. Something that size is not fitting in the torso of that 5'8" bot. But one wouldn't even do the trick. See, the bot uses 500 watts when doing something useful, and the steady power produced by the MMRTG is 20% of that, so you need 5 of them for the one bot, at $100 million each. Compounding this issue of nuclear batteries for Optimus is that despite sensational headlines to the contrary over the years, neither SpaceX nor Tesla is even working on them. There is no evidence to be found online that indicates Tesla or SpaceX is working on nuclear batteries of any kind for use off-world. So while this photo of these bots on a high-rise I-beam might be fun to fantasize about, for a host of reasons, all it will ever be is a CGI for the benefit of hapless investors and mindless muskrats. As a final note on this frame, the original photo this image was based on was not taken at the Empire State Building as Musk said. It was taken at 30 Rockefeller Plaza, then called the RCA Building, 17 months after the Empire State Building was completed. So Musk did not even get that detail right, and we're going to rejoin the stunned silence in progress.
And then for communications on Mars, we'll be using a version of Starlink to provide internet on Mars. Even at moving at the speed of light, your best case scenario is, I think around 3.5 minutes to Mars, and then worst case is 22 minutes or more because Mars is on the other side of the sun from Earth. It's quite challenging to do high bandwidth communications with Mars, but Starlink will achieve that.
You have to believe that Musk misspoke when he said Starlink would be bringing the high bandwidth communication to Mars. More accurately, and at best, it would be delayed communication channels given the lag he mentioned in the next breath of 3 to 22 minutes. It would be like early internet access in Wi-Fi cafes overseas. Could you send an email? Sure. Could you have a conversation on Zoom or watch a streaming movie? Not a chance in hell. And forget about teleoperating the Optimus robots from Earth. That's not going to work. That distance, therefore that delay, is not going to be overcome by technology. It is what it is. And so is the speed of light. So not even a theoretical fiber optic cable directly connected between Earth and Mars could run a link between the two in real time. High bandwidth communications in real time between Earth and Mars, as Musk promised here, is simply not physically possible with Starlink or with any other technology.
Yeah, and then we'll have the first humans lay the groundwork for permanent presence on the surface. And yeah, the goal, like you said, will be to make Mars self-sustaining as quickly as possible. sort of rough idea of what things will be like with the first city on Mars. My guess is we'll probably put the launch pads a little further away, or the landing pads, just in case.
Going through the imagery frame by frame, here you have a human sitting alone in a generally empty space the size of a North American living room, with houseplants sitting atop a round bench. The aesthetic might as well have come straight from Gene Roddenberry's archive. It is very safe to say that such luxurious and spacious quarters will not be waiting for anyone traveling to Mars. You'd be far more likely to have something like the Corbin Dallas apartment from Fifth Element, tiny and every single space with multiple functions, and storage would be at a premium. Then, there's the view from the approaching Starship observation platform. We've mentioned before, several times, including in our earliest episodes, the issues of having windows in space, and the mass of such reinforced glass cutting into payload capacity. The third frame, more numbers, so let's dig those out because they really don't jive with what Musk flashed up earlier. Quick rundown for people listening to this as a podcast. There's 4 numbers here, stating 10 launches per day from various sites on Earth, each launch bringing 200 tons to LEO for a total of 1.5 million tons to LEO, and 250,000 tons to Mars for every transfer window. So 1/6 of payload launched to LEO would actually be making its way to Mars. From this, it appears each ship now has a possible payload of 200 tons, not 100, and from here we can do the math as before. 250,000 tons then would be 1,250 landers, requiring 25,000 tanker launches at 20 per, requiring a minimum launch cadence of 33.6 ships per day, one every 40 minutes, call it 236 ships per week, every week for 26 months to hit that quota. Totally doable in Musk's deranged imagination, but he is not done yet.
But for Mars, we're going to need a lot of solar power. You can't really walk around on the surface of Mars, at least as yet, until Mars is terraformed to be like Earth. You need to walk around with a Mars suit and be, initially in kind of like glass domes. But it would work, and eventually we can make Mars into an Earth-like planet.
So there's the first acknowledgement of settlers requiring their own spacesuits to walk around on Mars. And as we went through in our earliest episodes, the equipment suitable for on-surface operations are not light. The current modern Axiom design comes in about 55 kilograms, which is 25 kilos lighter than the Apollo equivalent we used before. And that weight would also cut into the payload delivery capability of any manned lander. When we first brought up this point, a lot of Musk fanboys wrote in to tell us that not everybody needs their own suit, which was an interesting take, considering that without those suits, they would have no emergency life support system, and more functionally, would be trapped on the ship or in a habitat, unable to assist on the ground. Also, moving between buildings in some of these diagrams requires a jaunt outside. But it's the terraforming statements that are really the straw breaking the camel's back here. Even if you buy into the colonization of Mars, even if you buy into the ridiculous launch cadence that Musk is suggesting without showing the numbers, even if you think absolutely anybody who wants to go to Mars will be a suitable candidate, the mere suggestion that Mars can be terraformed into an Earth-like planet has to dispel any and all remaining credibility and totally remove the suspension of disbelief. Mars is dead. It may have supported life billions of years ago when it still had a molten core that created a magnetosphere that allowed the planet to retain its atmosphere. But that died 4 billion years ago. And without the atmosphere and magnetosphere, the surface has been baked in solar and galactic radiation without any meaningful barriers blocking it. There's no soil, no nutrients, no microbiome, as we went through in episode 6, Feeding the Colony 5 years ago. Very importantly, there is no significant presence of nitrogen, which is a key ingredient in animal and plant biology. So there's no nitrogen cycle, there's no water cycle, no carbon cycle. Other important biogeochemical cycles are the sulfur and phosphorus cycles. They don't exist, and without them, life does not exist. It is that simple. And we're talking elements here, not compounds, that do not magically appear out of thin air. Musk's statements in this regard fly directly in the face of actual scientists and experts who have told him terraforming Mars is an impossibility, and that includes using nuclear weapons, as he previously suggested, to melt the polar ice caps and create a state of global warming. It is not possible, even in theory. So this statement is ridiculous. Moreover, it's a fantastical lie, and people need to start calling him out on this at every presentation until he stops repeating it.
I have a lot of spaceports. We want to get to the point where we're transferring over 1 million tons at every Mars transfer window. And then that's like a serious civilization. A megaton per transfer window. So, yeah.
Another concept frame and another transfer window statement. Okay, what we're seeing in a photo here is a couple Optimus robots walking alongside a crawler transport platform with wheels instead of tractor treads, with a Starship atop it. And those platforms don't work on solar energy on Earth, where our solar panels are far more efficient. Now, the crawler that transports the SLS is a diesel-powered beast powered by a pair of 2 megawatt, 2,750 horsepower Alco V16 251C engines that drive 4 1 megawatt generators for traction, along with another pair of 794 kilowatt engines driving 2 750 kilowatt 1,000 horsepower generators to power auxiliaries, and a transmission has 16 traction motors at 4 per corner. It weighs 2,721 tons, about 6 million pounds curb weight, and measures 40 meters by 35, 131 feet by 114. Massive is an understatement, and are not running it on sun juice. Given the size of the components, they're also not getting it to Mars in a Starship cargo craft. But let's say the version that Musk showed here can break down into small enough pieces to fit every piece through the cargo door of a Starship. If it had a similar mass, it would take 14 Starships and 280 tanker launches at 200 tons, as per the previous frame, to bring just the components for assembly with nothing else on board. The final statement Musk made here was that he's now talking 1 megaton of material to be shipped to Mars every transfer window.
And we want to get to the point where we're transferring over 1 million tons at every Mars transfer window. And then that's like a serious civilization. A megaton per transfer window.
So now we get to do that math for this final equation. 1 million tons at 200 tons payload capacity instead of 100 is 5,000 landers, requiring 100,000 tanker fills in orbit before departure. In a 26-month window of 780 days, that's a minimum launch cadence of 134.6 ships per day, call it 950 per week, every week for 26 months with no days off. 5.6 launches per hour, or 1 launch every 11 minutes. Let us know when these numbers begin resembling insanity for you.
Because of the fact that you can't fly there continuously and you have to transfer in these windows, you'd have a gathering of 1,000 ships, or 2,000 ships, or more than that. So we have this kind of like Battlestar Galactica feel, where all these ships are in orbit waiting to depart. An amazing image of all these ships departing at once.
We covered this fantasy in great detail in our episode 3, 1 Million People on Mars, released July 8th, 2020. Because Musk has been making the Battlestar Galactica comparison for at least that long. In fact, it goes right back to the very first IAC presentations.
And then once the spaceship the tanks are full, the cargo has been transferred, and we reach the Mars rendezvous timing, which, as mentioned, is roughly every 26 months, that's when the ship would depart. Now, over time, there would be many spaceships. You'd ultimately have, I think, upwards of 1,000 or more spaceships waiting in orbit. And so that the Mars colonial fleet would depart en masse. They're kind of like Battlestar Galactica. We've seen that thing. That's a good show.
So for at least 9 years, Musk has never given that concept any serious thought. A quick recap of episode 3, where all the numbers are shown in detail, breaks down to this. We'll ignore the tanker flights completely to just demonstrate the logistical nightmare Musk is suggesting with this fantasy, with the 1,000 or 2,000 ships parked in orbit waiting to depart. Not that the Starship is now or will ever be human-rated, but we have to pretend it is to go through the numbers. We'll use the lower number that Musk uttered here, 1,000 manned vessels, carrying what would be 100,000 people, since Musk still says 100 people per ship per trip, despite simple math showing that that is physically impossible. But 1,000 ships every 26 months, ignoring the tankers, is a minimum launch cadence of 9 ships per week. The crew aboard those first launches will be in orbit for far longer than the people at the back end of the schedule. And the moment they arrive in orbit, their bodies will start adjusting to weightlessness by shrinking their heart, atrophying their muscle, and shedding calcium from their bones. That's just the beginning of the physiological changes. But from a supply and logistics standpoint, they're going to start consuming food and water straight away. If we're doing a steady cadence of launches throughout the available time frame over 26 months, each crew member on the first craft in orbit will consume about 2 tons of food. before the ship even begins their journey to Mars, and their bodies will already be in a very sorry state by then. So really the only amazing thing about this CGI image of all these ships departing Earth in a convoy for Mars is the fact that anybody at SpaceX would be fool enough to believe it's possible.
And then you're going to need, obviously, a lot of launch pads, a lot of landing pads on Mars, or you'll need to move the ships off the landing pad pretty fast. So if you got a few thousand ships inbound, probably need at least a few hundred landing pads. Anyway, we'll solve that problem later. So,
the infamous "we'll solve that problem later," especially when it's completely unlikely they will ever solve it at all. Several hundred landing pads, he said, close enough to inhabited structures to walk to them in a spacesuit, with thousands of ships using a couple hundred landing pads that are not outfitted with Maxilla towers. How many problems do you see with that suggestion? And what exactly would they be making the landing pads out of? They won't be able to replicate the landing pads used by Falcon boosters, for example, since that's a reinforced concrete disc, 286 feet or 86 meters across. Good luck pouring a water-based mixture on the surface of a frozen, dusty planet with almost no atmospheric pressure, where water boils off immediately. And what material could they even use that wouldn't expand and contract daily as the temperatures on Mars fluctuate 200 degrees Celsius? Just add this to the never-ending list of unanswered questions where Musk's chimerical vision of Mars colonization is concerned. Going back to this image, you know what we don't see here? Landing pads.
this is like an incredible thing to have, like this amazing city on Mars, the first city on another planet. And it's also an opportunity to, I think, for the Martians to rethink how they want civilization to be. So you can maybe rethink, like, what kind of form of government do you want? What new rules do you want to have? There's a lot of freedom and opportunity in Mars to do a recompile on civilization, which will be up to the Martians.
This image of the family looking out through the glass dome at the Starship launch goes back to at least September 2019, so he's been using it for 6 years. Before that, it was this image of modular components, some of them connected by tunnels. Neither has ever been explained in any part about how any of the structures would be built, who's building them, using what materials, or even where they exist now on Earth undergoing testing. And yet, this presentation was supposed to outline the road to making life multiplanetary. No details were provided. All he did was all he's ever done on this topic. Regurgitated the same talking points that caught our attention 9 years ago, thrown some new visuals featuring his animatronic biped, and left all the same questions unanswered. As for Musk wrapping it all up, saying Martians would have the ability to recompile society into some sort of political and social utopia, we covered many aspects of how society on Mars would more realistically look in our 2-part series Colonizing Mars, released in June of 2021. Feel free to give that series a look after we wrap up here, because with that weak round of applause from the employees in attendance that were still awake,
Let's get it done.
we have come to the end of Musk's 2025 version of his 2016 presentation. In closing, we're going to share a debate that we had with Grok on the topic of Starship, because as a neutral information resource, Grok can be quite useful on some questions when he's not referring to himself as Mecha Hitler. Musk has recited the rapidly reusable, reliable rocket line for many years, but what he has also said is that Starship will be the cheapest rocket ever built, with the nominal cost per Starship coming in at around $100 million. And even at that price tag, the $100,000 per ticket economics does not even come close to break even. Musk has also stated that the total program development cost of Starship will be somewhere between $5 and $10 billion. So we asked Grok, using the systems aboard the ISS as comparables, estimate the total cost of outfitting a single Starship to accommodate 100 people for the journey to Mars, carrying 2 years of supplies. Here is the exact query we used. Included in the costing for the vehicle were airframe and baseline, power systems, water systems, environmental control and life support, waste systems, food and rations, and crew quarters and other. And after providing a very lengthy sourced report, Grok came up with a total of, are you ready for this? $36.29 billion per ship. For his megaton per transfer window scenario, Musk was looking at 5,000 landers that would cost $182 trillion, almost double the global GDP from 2024 every 26 months. And that does not include the 100,000 tankers for refilling, nor any of the associated launch cost. Just fully kitted starships for the 100 people per that Musk says they can carry. So after watching his presentation in its entirety, we can infer from this information that anybody can find online. This cost is what Musk's presentation silently implies, without him telling you any of these critical details. Thanks for tuning in to this accidental 3-part feature-length series dissecting Musk's most recent non-public assault of his own employees with all the repetitive BS about Starship on Mars. Seriously, for someone who doesn't even have a mandate to go to Mars, he sure has a lot of CGI artists working for him on this. Meanwhile, Starship is getting ready to crash for the 10th time and explode for the 11th, well, some would argue for the 20th time, later on this month. And all we can say for certain about that launch ahead of time is it will absolutely not get Musk or NASA any closer to the Moon or Mars. Maybe by then, we'll be able to get our gap between episodes down to under 2 weeks. One quick thing to bring up before signing off is that this channel has grown to almost 120,000 subscribers, which is amazing. But many of the back library episodes that we've cited here have half that many views or fewer, which means there's a lot of you that missed out on the classic episodes that got us to where we are. So please do us a favor and watch 3 episodes from back in the beginning, and tell us which ones you watched, then which was your favorite. Thanks again for tuning in, and please share this series out with your friends, hit the thumbs up, and ring that notification bell so that you'll know when the Common Sense Skeptic returns.